Ever since the end of the Attitude Era, tag team wrestling has increasingly become less and less of a focus within WWE, to the point where, at times, the division has been little more than an afterthought, with the tag titles often being used as props to heat up singles feuds. That said, there are a few bright stars that have been able to carry tag teams kicking and screaming into the new millennium, continuing to wave the flag for it inside of Vince McMahon's promotion, and perhaps none have been able to do this more so than the Usos. Yes, over the last decade, the twins from California have been able to routinely put on some of the best matches in the company. All this while playing a major role in arguably the top program in the industry right now, alongside their cousin Roman Reigns. But how did they get to this point? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into their entire career journey in Jimmy and Jey, the Usos story. Joshua Samuel and Jonathan Salofa Fatu were both born on August 22, 1985 in San Francisco, California. And of course, being twins, the two would be close from the very beginning, something which would extend to them sharing many of the same interests growing up, interests that included both football and professional wrestling. But it should have been obvious that they would be interested in the latter, as the brothers were already part of one of the most celebrated wrestling dynasties in the world already, the Anoa'i family, a family that's lineage included the likes of The Rock, Yokozuna, the Wild Samoans, and their father, Rikishi. That said, before they got involved in the world of wrestling themselves, they would spend a period playing football while attending both Escambia High School in Pensacola, Florida, and then later, the University of West Alabama. After that, and they would both work together at a furniture moving store for a while, all this before a conversation with their uncle Umaga convinced them to finally follow their family's footsteps and try out their hands in the ring. That was how, in 2009, they would get a tryout with WWE, with this ultimately going so well that it would lead to the twins both getting signed up to developmental contracts, as from there, they were sent over to Florida Championship Wrestling to learn the craft. And living up to their family's reputation then, such fast learners did they end up being that come November 5th of that year, they'd be making their first on-screen appearances, going by the name of the Fatu brothers and quickly managing to pick up wins against fellow siblings Duke and Bo Rotunda, the former of whom is better known now to fans as Bray Wyatt. After that, and they would start an association with fellow Samoan wrestler Donnie Marlowe, with the current New Japan star often being found in their corner at this time as they continue to rack up wins against the likes of Titus O'Neil and Big E Langston. And of course, with all this early success came a lot of additional attention from WWE officials too, who, seeing the two potential stars on their hands, decided to rebrand Joshua and Jonathan around this time, changing their ring names to Jey and Jimmy Uso respectively, with this new surname aptly being the Samoan word for brother. But that wasn't all, because on top of that, they would also gain a new manager in the form of fellow future Samoan star Tamina Snuka at this point as well, someone who also had a storied family legacy of their own. So with the act now complete then, the winning streak continued as the Usos would defeat the Fortunate Sons to win the FCW Florida Tag Team titles on the March 13, 2010 episode of FCW. And following this, they would successfully defend these belts on a number of occasions over the next few months, fending off future stars like Trent Beretta, Darren Young, Skip Sheffield, and Unico in the process. Come June 3rd, however, their reign would finally come to an end when they were defeated by Los Aviadores. That said, they needn't have been upset about this, because the only reason they'd dropped the belts at all was because they had just recently been moved up to the main roster, where now, in front of a much larger audience, the twins could really get a chance to shine for the first time. Yes, it had been a couple of weeks prior on May 24th that Jey, Jimmy, and Tamina would all make their debuts on Raw as heels by attacking the, at the time, unified WWE Tag Team Champions, the Hart Dynasty. And after making an impact with this move then, they would cut a promo on the following week's TV, telling the world that they were there to represent their family bloodline and wouldn't stop until they had the respect of everyone around them. But of course, respect must be earned, and so the trio would set about doing just this when they made their main roster in-ring debut on the June 17th episode of Superstars soon after, with the brothers there defeating Goldust and Mark Henry in convincing fashion. 3 days later, however, they would have less success, because it was here, in a mixed tag match, that all three members of the stable would lose to the Hart Dynasty, this forcing them to take a step back and realize that they still had some ways to go if they wanted to be the best. So regrouping then, they would start training for the rematch on the July 12th episode of Raw. And in the end, it was there, after a hard-fought battle, that Jey would pick up the pinfall over Davey Boy Smith Jr., this earning the Usos a shot at the Tag Team Gold at the July 18th Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Sadly though, when the time for that match came, the brothers would fall short once again. And from there, they would lose another title shot at the following month's Night of Champions, this only adding a further blow to their confidence. And as it happened, it would continue to get worse before it got better, because come the December 6th episode of Raw, Tamina would have abandoned the brothers as she began her own face turn. So now at a career low then, the Usos would hope to find better luck elsewhere when, as part of the 2011 draft, they were moved over to SmackDown, with them there turning face themselves as they feuded with the Core during their early months on the Blue brand. And it was also around this time that they began incorporating the traditional Samoan war dance, the Siva Tau, into the ring entrance, with this helping to energize them before each bout as, more often than not, they would end up coming out the victors. Sadly though, while their careers were on the rise in the ring, setbacks would be taking place outside of it as Jimmy would be arrested on a drunk driving charge, an incident that would worryingly continue to recur in the years that followed. And perhaps as punishment for this then, the Usos would spend some time largely away from the main roster towards the end of that year, instead showing up in the 5th season of NXT to make the lives of Darren Young and JTG a living hell. And soon seeking revenge for these attacks then, other NXT contestants such as Kurt Hawkins, Tyler Rex, and Titus O'Neil would step up to the plate too, with them each taking on the brothers in different combinations heading into 2012. Come August 15th of that year, however, it would be the Ascension who proved that they had Jey and Jimmy's number when they laid them out after a match. All this before doing the same thing again 2 weeks later. Hell, on the September 5th episode of NXT, they would even pin the Usos in a match, this just lending a further blow to the Californians as it looked increasingly like their once promising career was fast falling away from them. That was why they must have been relieved then when, come 2013, after having had some largely uneventful appearances on the main roster once more, they would finally get a chance to sink their teeth into something again when on the June 3rd episode of Raw, they would enter into a feud with The Shield over the WWE. In fact, so good were these matches that, soon, they would be back in the company's good graces, as by the start of 2014, they would go on a winning streak, with this eventually leading to them getting a shot at the by-then Tag Team Champions, the New Age Outlaws, on the March 3rd episode of Raw, defeating the Attitude Era Stars there to start their first run on top of the division. And riding this wave of momentum then, the brothers would successfully defend these titles on the WrestleMania 30 pre-show just 1 month later against Ryback and Curtis Axel, The Real Americans, and Los Matadores in a fatal 4-way elimination match. After that, they would have a feud with the Wyatt family that would see them rack up further defenses at both the Money in the Bank and Battleground pay-per-views in June and July, respectively. Unfortunately, however, it would be at September 21st's Night of Champions that their 202-day reign would finally come to an end, when the babyface duo of the Rhodes brothers proved to be too much for them to handle on that particular night. Still, they wouldn't stay down for long, because by December 29th of that year, they would get a nice Christmas present when they regained the belts once more after defeating The Miz and Damien Sandow. And it was also around this time that the two would first associate themselves on screen with Naomi, the very same woman who had been the longtime partner of Jimmy for years prior to this and who had actually married him that January. Sadly though, this second title run wouldn't last for long as, come March of 2015, Jey suffered a shoulder injury that would take him out of action for the next 6 months, with Jimmy spending the intervening time working as a commentator and occasional wrestler on Main Event. But while his brother was trying to find his place on the roster as a temporary solo star, Jey wouldn't be sitting around the house doing nothing, as he would instead be getting married himself too to his partner Takesha Travis, with them, like Jimmy and Naomi, still remaining a couple to this day and having 2 kids together. And by November 2nd of that year, now fully healed up, the newlywed would finally be ready to reunite with his brother on screen once again as the two teamed with Dean Ambrose, Ryback, and their cousin Roman Reigns to take on Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens, and The New Day in a Survivor Series elimination match at that month's titular pay-per-view. And this would turn out to be their first real interaction with The New Day as it happened, a team that, in the years that followed, they would go on to have a career-defining rivalry with, as the two units often carried the tag team division on their backs. Yes, it's often been one of the biggest complaints of WWE that tag team wrestling, outside of one notable period during the late 90s and early 2000s, often feels like an afterthought, with little effort being given to its booking or its roster of teams. So with the Usos and the New Day both coming to the forefront around this time, they would make it their mission to make tag team wrestling important once more. Something that they would begin doing at the January 24, 2016 Royal Rumble, when they faced off over the WWE Tag Team titles, with the New Day ultimately picking up the win in this one. After that then, the Cali Boys would start a feud with the Dudley Boys that climaxed in them picking up a victory over the ECW Legends during the WrestleMania 32 pre-show. Following this, it would be back to business as usual though, as they started to pick off the full-time roster one by one once more, beginning with the Social Outcasts on the April 11th episode of Raw, and then moving on to the Good Brothers from there as, on the May 2nd episode of Raw, they once again teamed with their cousin Roman Reigns to take on Gallows, Anderson, and AJ Styles in a six-man tag match. But despite putting on a strong effort here, the Samoan trio would end up losing this match. And to make matters worse, the Usos would also lose their straight-up tag match against the Good Brothers at May 22nd's Extreme Rules, this leaving them once again stuck in a rut. So perhaps it was a good thing that, on July 19th of that year, they would be drafted back over to SmackDown, where they would turn heel for the first time since 2011, attacking and defeating babyface teams such as American Alpha and the Hype Bros there as they started their claim of being the dominant force in the Blue Brand's tag division. And with this change in attitude came a change in look too, as, now dropping the more traditional tribal elements of their character, Jey and Jimmy would morph into more street-like thugs, proclaiming that they had always been down since day one-ish, and were now able to show it fully as they started a feud with American Alpha leading into 2017. And come March 21st of that year, this feud would even see the twins defeat the rivals to win the SmackDown Tag Team Championships, with this making them the first ever team to win both the Red and Blue Brands titles. So seeking to go on another lengthy run then, they started racking up successful defenses against the likes of Breezango. Unfortunately though, it would be their arch foes the New Day who would end things this time, as it was at July 23rd's Battleground that, after having yet another banger together, everyone's favorite trio would defeat the Usos to take home the gold. That wouldn't be the end of things, however, because from there, the brothers would invoke the rematch clause, continuing on the feud for the next couple of months then, as the two teams continued to wage war. And this would all climax in the first ever tag team Hell in a Cell match at October 8th's titular pay-per-view, with both the Usos and the New Day there, putting on one of the best tag matches seen inside a WWE ring for years as, come the end of it, the Cali Boys would have regained their titles once more. But now having a newfound respect for their rivals, the brothers would turn babyface on the following episode of SmackDown by telling the New Day that they respected them and hoped to have more battles with them in the future. And so now, formerly on the side of the good guys, they would put on further classics leading into the new year against the likes of The Bar, Chad Gable and Shelton Benjamin, and Rusev and Aiden English. After that, come WrestleMania 34 on April 8, 2018, they would get to appear on the main show for the first time in their careers, there defending their titles against both the New Day and the Bludgeon Brothers, with the latter team of heavyweights coming out the victors by the end of this one. Still, defeat or not, it was a major milestone checked off for the duo regardless, and a well-deserved one at that. By finally getting themselves a spot on the main card at a WrestleMania, it showed that the Usos had forced WWE to take the tag division just a little more seriously than it had been doing. And they would continue to prove their worth, and the worth of the division as a whole going forward from there then, as they had memorable matches against teams such as the Good Brothers, The Bar, and even Team Hell No over the remainder of the year. That said, it wasn't until 2019 that they would once again re-enter the title picture, as it was in February of that year at Elimination Chamber that they defeated Shane McMahon and The Miz to start their fourth run as SmackDown Tag Team Champions. After that, and they would show further love to the New Day when, during a gauntlet match designed to make it near impossible for Kofi Kingston to get his WrestleMania 35 WWE title shot against Daniel Bryan, the new tag champions would forfeit their spot in the bout, effectively giving Xavier Woods and Big E a bye and making their eventual victory that much easier. As a storyline punishment for this, however, they would get placed into a fatal four-way match at the Showcase of the Immortals later that month, where they had to defend against not only The Bar, but Aleister Black and Ricochet, and Shinsuke Nakamura and Rusev too. And though they would end up winning this one, the whole thing wore them out so much that, come the next episode of SmackDown on April 9th, they'd be left easy pickings for the Hardy Boys as the Carolina Brothers started their latest reign on top. So, hoping to find better successes elsewhere once again then, the now former champions would move over to Raw during the 2019 draft. There, starting a program with the Revival, while also, as a consequence of the new wildcard rule that had been put in place by the McMahons, returning to the Blue brand to simultaneously have a feud with Daniel Bryan and Eric Rowan. Sadly though, after Jimmy was arrested for a DUI yet again in July of 2019, the two would be written off of TV for a period as punishment for this, with them not being seen again until January 3rd, 2020, at which point they would return full-time to the SmackDown brand and align themselves with Roman Reigns as, together, the trio became known as the Bloodline. And as a unit, the Bloodline would quickly enter a program with King Corbin, Dolph Ziggler, and Bobby Roode, usually getting the better of the heels here, and at one point, even showering Corbin in dog food. Unfortunately, things would once again be cut short, however, when, at that March's WrestleMania, the one held in front of no fans, Jimmy would suffer a knee injury during his match, this putting him out of action indefinitely and leaving Jey to go on as a solo act for the first time in his career. Yes, at this point, Roman Reigns had also taken his own sabbatical, and so now, with none of his family around him then, Jey would enter into a battle royal to determine the new #1 contender to the Intercontinental title on the May 29th episode of SmackDown. After failing to win this, though, he would remain away from TV until September, at which point he would quickly earn himself a shot at his cousin Roman's Universal title, with the added wrinkle to the story now being that the champ had recently turned heel and that, not being happy with this change in attitude, Jey hoped to bring him back to the side of the light, while also proving that he had it in him to be a singles champion himself. Yes, in the lead-up to the biggest match of his career, the #1 contender would aptly cut the promo of his career when he passionately spoke about why he was more than just half of the Usos and why he deserved all the respect he was due. And under normal circumstances, this may have even led to a big babyface title win for him, but unfortunately, this was right at the beginning of the Tribal Chief's run on top, so no one was going to get the better of him for a long time yet. Still, the two would put on an excellent match at September 27th's Clash of Champions regardless, with Jey doing more than enough there to prove that he was every bit as deserving of the respect he wanted. In the end, though, it would be his returning brother Jimmy who would seal his fate that night as, after Roman had Jey locked in a guillotine, Jimmy would be forced to throw in the towel so as to end things before his twin could get hurt. That said, this performance would be enough to earn Jey a rematch at the following month's Hell in a Cell where, this time, inside the cell itself, the two would put on another banger, continuing on with arguably the best storyline in the industry at that point, as Roman would force his cousin to tap out, acknowledging him as the head of the table in the process, and from there, forcing Jey to become the full-time lackey to the champ, backing him up at all turns, and helping him to keep hold of his precious title. And while Jimmy would at first be reluctant to follow his brother down this path of servitude, soon he would join in as well, as now, fully reunited once more, the Bloodline reigned dominant over SmackDown, with Roman Reigns continuing to hold on to the Universal title, all while elsewhere, the Usos were starting their 5th reign as the Blue Brand's Tag Team Champions after beating the Mysterios at August 21st's SummerSlam. And as it stands right now, that's how things remain. The Usos have never been in a stronger position, with them now being fully a part of the biggest angle in the company and firmly establishing themselves as arguably the best tag team of their generation in the process, a team that has achieved just about everything they can and then some, and who have, along with the New Day, largely contributed towards keeping the division alive when no one in management seemed to care about it. And what makes this all the more impressive is that, at just 36 years old, the two still have plenty of years left in them. So what will the future hold for Jey and Jimmy? Well, that's up to them because they've long since proven by now that whatever they set their sights on, they'll achieve it. And that's been undeniable ever since day one. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.